Peter Minkler. I play viola and I joined the orchestra in December of 1984. That's correct. Yes, I was in high school. I studied with Rick for 2 years, and he helped guide me to go to conservatory. And I started out at CIM, Cleveland Institute of Music, for 2 years, and then I transferred to Eastman and studied with Rick's teacher, as it turned out, Francis Tercy, for 2 years. So it was a great way of learning how to play the instrument and also learning how to become a musician. I was invited to play with the Chicago Symphony, and as it turned out, Marin Alsop was the conductor for the Bernstein Mass, which was broadcast on TV, so it was exciting to be there for that. And then I went to Cincinnati Symphony for 2 weeks, just at the end of September. When I won the Mary Sawyer's Baker Prize in 2010, a lot of people use the money to buy an instrument or to do something like that, and I'm very happy with my instruments. So instead of going that route, I decided to start commissioning works. And I knew Jonathan from the pieces we had played of his with the BSO, and I thought, and he'd already written something for viola, and he'd already written something for chorus, and then of course he'd written orchestral works, so he knew how everything worked and how it would work together. And so I asked him if he would write a piece for a viola, chorus, and orchestra based on poetry of Edgar Allan Poe, because I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it, and also kind of dark and sort of sad, sort of like the viola can be. So he did. He wrote it for me, and I premiered it in 2016 with Andrew Constantine and the Fort Wayne Philharmonic. And then a year or two later, I think it was 2 years later, I played it with the Reading Symphony, again with Andrew, and then at the Choral Arts, with Choral Arts here, and both here and in Reading. So I played it 3 times, and each time it was very well received, and I enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed working with Jonathan, and it was really a great experience. Well, it's kind of a funny story, I guess. I played violin. I started when I was 6, and I got about 10 or 11 years old, and I found that I was getting headaches when I was practicing, and it turned out that the pitch, because it's so high, that it was really affecting me. It's today, if I sit too close to the high woodwinds or even violins, it can really give me a bad headache. So it was suggested that maybe I try the viola because it's a little lower and it doesn't go that high all that often, and so it might be a good choice for me. So that's why I switched to viola initially, anyway. I was lucky to find mine. This is an Erdős viola, 16 and 3/16, which means from here to here is 16 and 3/16 long, and it's also very wide, as you can see. It's a Maggini, what they call a Maggini model, because Maggini, an Italian maker, made instruments that look like this. The problem with the viola is that in order to get the C string to work correctly, the instrument has to be enormous, 18 inches rather than 15 and whatever, or 16 or whatever it is. So what makers have done, especially in the 20th century, was that they've altered the shape. So they've made it a little bit wider from here to here, so the box is bigger, and also more here, so that the C string supposedly will vibrate better and you'll get a nicer sound. And I was very fortunate to find this instrument because it has a very rich, deep sound, which is what I prefer in the viola. Some people like more of a tenor sound and so on, but I like to have a mix between a cello and a violin, which is what this one does for me. Well, the violin is very easy to play. Of course, violinists will disagree, but it responds very easily. You put the bow on the string and off you go. With the viola, you have to work a bit harder to get the sound to come out because the strings are a little larger, the instrument's a little larger, and at cello, it's even more so. You have to work to get the sound to come out. So that's a real difference between the two. The other thing is that when you see violists play, you might see them playing in first position a lot or lower on the instrument, in this part of it rather than up here, because you're trying to get as many overtones out of the instrument as you can. So the lower you go, the more the strings vibrate. And the other thing is that we play a lot of our repertoire near the frog. This from the middle to the frog rather than up here. It doesn't respond very well. You want to try to take advantage of the weight of the frog to pull sound out of the instrument. So if you play something here, it isn't necessarily as easy as... Now that may not come over on video very well, but it's a lot easier to play here than here and to get a sound out of it. I'll play a little bit of the first movement of the Rockberg Sonata, George Rockberg Sonata. Well, a lot of it is a matter of repertoire and a matter of history. The viola was sort of where the bad violinists end up, was in the viola section. That's where the jokes came, and that's where all of that, because the violas were known as they can't really play very well, so we'll just stick them down there. But many of the great composers played viola. Bach apparently did, Beethoven, Mozart, Respighi, Vaughan Williams, Dvorak, they all were violists. So maybe that's because they play the middle of the range, and we play with the second violins a lot, and sort of like a sandwich where the violins are the one piece of bread and the basses and cellos are the other, and then we're in the middle. That's really where a lot of the interesting stuff happens. So that could be why we bred so many composers from the instrument. But I think it's because it was just not very well respected a long time ago. But the repertoire has grown tremendously from the 20th century on and even into today. And the ability to play, I mean, if you look at a Wagner opera, the violin parts and the viola parts and all the string parts are just as difficult as each other. It isn't like the violas are just sort of hanging on a C string while everyone else is playing. Or even Beethoven's works, many of it are either doubled or we come in with the cellos and basses because he didn't think the viola section could handle it. So I think that's why the lack of respect. Well, certainly the beginning of the exposition, after the introduction, the violas started with the cellos. And then on and on. But we really get to start the piece, so that's a nice part of it. I was looking through the rest of the movements to see if the the viola is featured. There's a little bit of a counter melody in the second movement, the sort of waltz that's not a waltz. There's that. And then the third movement starts with all of the strings. It's a scherzo march all at the same time. So that's what we do. The fourth movement is what's the most interesting to me, because after all of that march, then he comes to the slow movement, or the last, where the last movement is the slow movement as opposed to it being reversed. And the beginning of it, if you know it, it sounds like this. But what he does is he divides the notes between the violins. So nobody plays that melody. The first violins play. And the second violins play. So in his day, the violins were divided on the left and the right. He was trying to get it integrated so that you wouldn't hear just the melody from your left side, which would be the first violins, but you hear it from both sides at once. And then the violas and cellos fill in the harmonies. So that's an interesting point when you're listening to especially the beginning of the fourth movement, is that nobody's really playing the melody, although you hear it. Well, there's the Roman Carnival, speaking of Berlioz, the Roman, and we have a really nice melody in the beginning of, or in the middle of the introduction.